Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we count down the 5 greatest Mr. Freeze stories ever told. Remember how the top 5 Hatter video was the hardest I ever had to make? Because there just aren't any good Mad Hatter stories. Well, almost none. Well, it's the same thing with Mr. Freeze. I've searched high and low for great Freeze comics, and they're incredibly hard to come by. Before the animated series reimagined the character, Freeze was a pretty boring, flat supervillain with a weak origin and poor motivations. Then after Taz and the comics adopted the version from the cartoon, Freeze was still a pretty bad character. Sure, they incorporated Nora and all that, but for some reason the writers on the books, including Paul Dini himself who created the great Taz Freeze, decided to go with a very unsympathetic portrayal of the guy. Still, there are some good Mr. Freeze comics out there, and let's count down the 5 very best ones. Feel free to write your own favorites in the comments. Number 5. Ends of the Earth Part 1. Written by Scott Snyder and penciled by Jock, this is the first part of the second arc of All-Star Batman, published earlier this year, 2017 that is. In it, Batman has tracked Mr. Freeze to Alaska, where the icy villain is holed up in a research center in the middle of nowhere. There, the Dark Knight discovers that Victor has awoken all people who have been cryogenically frozen throughout history. They now act as his army, and with their help, Freeze plans to unleash an ancient virus that will eradicate all life on Earth and cover the world in a snowy landscape. Victor, alongside his frozen wife Nora and the others awoken, shall then populate this new world, a better one than what came before, according to Freeze. Or yeah, something like that. This comic is pretty weird and somewhat surreal even, so I'm not sure I fully understood everything. The fact that it's written in prose as opposed to ordinary speech bubbles makes it further confusing, but what I was able to grasp I kinda liked. Yeah, kinda. Like I said, great Freeze stories are near impossible to find, in the regular DC continuity at least, so I have to include stuff that's merely pretty good here. But anyway, I find the portrayal of Victor interesting in this comic. It's very reminiscent of Ra's al Ghul, an extremist who wants to destroy the world so that he can create a new, better one in the ruins. Usually Mr. Freeze isn't depicted as an insane villain. His motivations are fairly logical, but here the guy is completely off his rocker. We can see where he's coming from, but it's a totally mad scheme. It's also perhaps his grandest scheme. I mean, Victor has tried to freeze Gotham City 100 times, but never the entire world. Not that I can recall at the moment at least. Number 4. In the Line of Duty. Published in 2002, this two-parter is the opening arc of the Gotham Central series. The writers were Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka, and the penciler was Michael Lark. In it, detectives Driver and Fields investigate a lead to a kidnapping, and instead accidentally run into our dear Mr. Freeze. Obviously not equipped to deal with a big-time supervillain like Freeze, the 2 cops are easily dispatched by the cold rogue. Frosty kills Fields by freezing him and then smashing the poor guy into bits, while he leaves Driver alive, merely freezing his hands. This is part of his MO, as Victor likes to cause others intense grief, just like he himself experienced after losing his wife Nora. Following this event, Driver and the rest of the MCU devote everything to capturing Freeze without the help of the Batman, as this time it's personal. Turns out though that the Snowman is planning something big, something which may be out of the police's league. So this may be a pretty odd pick, as Freeze is portrayed as a stone-cold, pure evil killer. His plot here is very simple too and not especially interesting. He's just going to kill all of the GCPD during a speech held by ex-commissioner Jim Gordon. Why is Freeze doing this? We don't know. I guess we can just assume it's because he's a villain, and that's the sort of stuff they do, right? Despite that, I still find this story very interesting, because it offers us a look at Victor through the eyes of the ordinary policeman of Gotham. This is not a Batman vs. Mr. Freeze story, or even a Mr. Freeze story. It's a story about what it's like to be a cop in Gotham City, a town full of crazy freaks and extremely dangerous supercriminals. We get to see the terrifying aspect of Freeze in a way that we can't in a Batman story, and a different perspective of these characters that we know so well can sometimes be very fascinating. Number 3. There will be a cold time in the old town tonight. Published in Batman 308 in 1978, this one was written by Len Wein and penciled by John Calnan. In the story, Batman stumbles upon Mr. Freeze's latest scheme, namely tricking the wealthy people of Gotham into buying immortality from him. Victor uses a new cryogenical freezing process that he's invented to make them just like he is, a forever preserved Iceman. However, each attempt fails, leaving the millionaires mindless snow zombies for Victor to command. It turns out that this entire scheme is only meant as a series of of test runs with the purpose of perfecting the freezing process until it is capable of fully preserving a human being. And what's the end goal of this plot? Why is Mr. Freeze doing this? Must be something sinister, right? No, he's perfecting the machine for use on the love of his life, a woman named Hildy. Victor is tired of the loneliness his condition has resulted in and wants someone to share his frosty eternal life with. Now he's finally found that someone in Hildy. Little does he know though that Hildy doesn't love him back. She's just using Freeze to gain eternal life and a preserved youthful beauty. Maybe you didn't expect a story with the old Mr. Freeze on its list, pre-Taz and Nora, and it is true that all the others except for this one are pretty mediocre, but this comic feels a lot like the Taz Freeze, long before Taz even existed. Victor isn't motivated by money as he usually always was, but by love. Hildy doesn't actually love him, but he truly does want to spend the rest of eternity by her side. This is how we all see Mr. Freeze, as a hopeless romantic, sadly destined for tragedy. Sure, the story ain't no Heart of Ice, but still a lot better than all the other old school Freeze stories. They don't really feel like Mr. Freeze, but this one does. Number 2. Cold Case. A three-parter published in Legends of the Dark Knight in 2006. The writer was Christus N. Gage, and the penciler was Ron Wagner. In it, a true crime writer decides to open up an old unsolved murder spree from Gotham's past, committed by the city's very own Ripper. The guy is planning to release a book on the subject, and he claims to have the answer as to the killer's identity, and you'll never believe who it is: Thomas Wayne. Then suddenly a mysterious assailant kills the writer and begins to hunt anyone else connected to the information he held. Naturally, I have to spoil the whole thing, or else I can't even talk about it. This mystery killer, who's the real Ripper, turns out to be Mr. Freeze. It wasn't Wayne who committed the deeds all those years ago, but Victor Freeze. He killed the people to harvest their organs for his dying wife, Nora, who was not yet frozen at the time. Eventually, she found out about her husband's heinous acts, but reluctantly decided to turn a blind eye. Her conscience couldn't take it though, so she spilled the beans to her doctor, who happened to be Thomas Wayne. The doctor-patient confidentiality kept him from telling anyone, and shortly afterwards, he was gunned down in the cold streets, preventing him from ever doing so. Thusly, the truth about the Ripper murders remained a secret for decades, until now, which is why Victor is offing these people. It's not for his own sake though, but for Nora's. He doesn't want the truth to come out about his beloved wife being involved in the killings, which would have tainted the memory of her. So this is a pretty unusual tale that kinda messes with the characters' pasts, but it features a really good take on Freeze. It's very much in line with the animated series, depicting Victor as a rogue driven by love. He'll do anything for Nora, even kill people and steal their organs, and then kill some more people to keep her reputation safe. If that isn't the most romantic thing you've ever heard, then I don't know what is. And now for the greatest Mr. Freeze story of them all. Number 1. Snow. This one was published across 5 issues of Legends of the Dark Knight in 2005 and features the writing of J.H. Williams III and Dan Curtis Johnson, while the penciling was handled by Seth Fisher. It's a retelling of Mr. Freeze's origin based on the Taz version. In it, we meet Victor Freeze, a cryogenicist working for a research company called Neodigma. There he leads a project to create various cryogenic technology for the military, although he himself actually wants to use it for medical purposes. Victor believes what they're building is to be used as a deterrent only, and not as a weapon. However, he's completely wrong, as his supervisor goes behind his back and agrees to the military's demands of a super weapon. Meanwhile, Victor's wife Nora falls ill with an incurable genetic disease, and in a desperate attempt at saving her, he puts her in one of the cryo machines at Neodigma. However, he discovers too late that his team has changed the settings on the device to a weapons program without notifying him. The machine then freezes Nora, and believing he's killed her, a distraught Victor destroys it, exposing himself to the cold effects in a suicide attempt. It fails, however, and Victor is turned into Mr. Freeze, an Iceman who freezes everything he touches. He then begins to hallucinate the image of an angelic Nora, who tells him he must set things right by killing the others of Neodigma, both in revenge and for stopping them from weaponizing the cryo technology. So this is not the first comic to adapt the Taz origin. Paul Dini himself did it too in 1997. That story feels like a poor man's version of Heart of Ice though, while this one kinda does its own thing, yet still stays true to the core of the cartoon's Freeze portrayal. It's not as good as Heart of Ice, and I don't like Freeze's ice touch power as opposed to his regular handicap, but still a pretty great comic. What I find the most interesting is the fact that Victor is motivated by more than just revenge for his wife, but also to stop the creation of a super weapon. That makes the guy even more sympathetic, and he could almost have been a hero, as he's out to do the right thing, he's just using the wrong methods. While the story isn't as good as Taz, it is a really great alternate take on Freeze that I do recommend every Bat fan reads. So there you have it, those are the 5 greatest Mr. Freeze stories ever told, in my opinion. Of course, the ultimate Freeze is the one from the animated series, and it always will be. I'd say go with that first, if you haven't already, which you probably have, and then check these out. Just like with the Mad Hatter, the comic book version is secondary to the Taz one. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.